Good morning and welcome back to Deadly Desire, the Brendan Banfield trial. I'm your host, Guy Lambert. Today, testimony is set to resume in the high-profile Fairfax County trial of Mr. Banfield, who's accused of killing his wife and another man, allegedly to continue a relationship with the family's au pair. Prosecutors say Banfield and his au pair, Juliana Magalhaes, were in a romantic relationship and planned the killings together. They allege the pair used a fetish website to lure Joseph Ryan to the home, staged a fake home invasion, and then killed both Ryan and Banfield's wife, Christine. Magalhaes, who originally faced murder charges, pleaded guilty to manslaughter and is now a key witness for the prosecution. She testified last week that she and Banfield had an affair, that Banfield wanted to, quote, get rid of his wife, and that they practiced shooting guns together. Prosecutors also allege Banfield spent some $30,000 to upgrade the home's windows to muffle sound. The jury heard Magalhaes describe the night of the killings as well. Jurors also saw crime scene photos, heard the original 911 call, and watched video of Banfield near a McDonald's, which prosecutors say shows him waiting to return home and carry out the plan. That leads us to today, where the trial continues. Our very own Bob Barnard filed this report just minutes ago outside of the Fairfax County Courthouse.
Well, good morning, Guy. Hello, everyone. Back here in our mobile newsroom outside the Fairfax County Courthouse, where we believe prosecutors will wrap up their case today. When we last heard from them, it's been a long weekend. But last Thursday, at the end of the day, they said, look, they only had a couple more witnesses to call. So this 4-week-long trial, as we expected it to be, may just be a 2-week trial. We'll see. I mean, the witness list that the prosecution has includes Brendan Banfield's mother, Teresa. It also includes a representative from FetLife, which is that fetish website at the heart of the prosecution's case, which was apparently manipulated by Brendan Banfield, who is on trial for murder, and his au pair girlfriend, Juliana Magalhaes, to using that website to try to lure in a fall guy to be a part of their murderous plot, which, according to prosecution and Juliana, the au pair, it did work. So will the prosecution call someone from FetLife? Will they put or try to put Brendan Banfield's mother on the stand to try to solidify their case that he committed murder in 2 cases against Joe Ryan and his wife, Christine? We're not sure. I mean, based on what's been laid out so far, besides the au pair's story, there is, from our observation, not a lot of evidence that seems to tie Brendan Banfield to the stabbing death of his wife, a forensic scientist for the state of Virginia. The Commonwealth last week said there was no DNA from Brendan Banfield on that knife that was used to kill Christine. So we'll see what the prosecution has up their sleeve. Apparently just a couple more witnesses today. And then what does the defense do? I mean, at the heart of their defense is that this is not the story of the truth as to what happened in that Reston home now almost 3 years ago. And they'll likely, the truth as according to the au pair, that Brendan Banfield murdered his own wife. In some of the pre-trial hearings, the defense was trying to pick at the fact that within the Fairfax County Police Department, there was some disagreement among investigators as to what actually happened on that morning of the murders, February 24th, 2023. So, because apparently there were some detectives and other staff that were part of the investigation initially that were transferred into other positions within the police department, ostensibly, according to the defense, because they weren't going along with the theory of who killed whom. So, will the defense call those kind of witnesses to try to establish for the jury some doubt as to the real story as to what happened that morning? The defense has a long witness list as well. Will they call everybody or a majority of people or just some of the people on that list? We don't know. The prosecution list was long, 6 pages worth. They have not called everyone, and again say they only have 2 more witnesses to call today. So we'll see what the prosecution does. what the defense does in terms of presenting their case, and it all begins this morning, guys. It should be interesting, and we'll be all over it.
Interesting to say the least. Yet again, Bob Barnard filing that report just minutes ago outside of the Fairfax County Courthouse. He is now inside that courtroom where the trial has now resumed. Vernon Miles also joining us as well, and you have been covering this minute by minute. Vernon, we heard what Bob had to say with regard to the trial perhaps being a little bit shorter than what many assumed early on. And that's a question that you and I, we had as well. You posed that earlier today.
Well, we thought it was going to be a 3 to 4 week trial. It may still go into 3 weeks, but I'm hearing talk that it may wrap up as early as the end of this week. We'll have to see. Again, like the witness list, they're getting it's a long list, but they've said they only have 2 more for today. And last week they said those probably won't take the whole day either. So after this, it's really just ending arguments. We'll see what the defense does. The defense could be dragging this out over the next few days. One of the things that Bob mentioned there is that we haven't really heard the defense's case yet. The defense hasn't really laid out their argument for what happened. We haven't really seen them kind of attack the prosecution story. So I think that's going to be really what determines how long this trial goes and what shape it takes from here.
Yeah, it's interesting you posed that question. Let's go ahead and bring in Dante Mills, trial attorney extraordinaire, now joining us as we cover this trial. Dante, you heard Vernon just make mention of perhaps the defense taking a certain stance, and you being a trial attorney, an expert one at that. I'm hoping you could perhaps lead us into what exactly their defense will be. What will they say? What could they say?
Their whole entire defense is going to be that this witness who decided to take a plea deal that gave her time served, and that's something we just learned recently, that she was actually given time served so that she can be back out on the streets where she was potentially facing a life sentence. They're going to say you can't believe her, that she made this story up so that she could get out of jail. They're going to point to the letter that she received from her mother, apparently directing her, is what they're going to argue, to blame this all on Banfield. They're going to say that this is a concocted story by a prosecution and an investigator that wanted a result. So they found somebody they thought would be guilty and then figured out a way to make them guilty. That's what the defense is going to say. I can't tell you what witnesses they will call to back that up, but that has to be what their theory is going to be, because you have testimony coming from apparently someone who was involved in this plot. They have to make her not credible, because if the jury believes her, then he's going to be found guilty.
Now, the prosecution said at the start of this they were going to lay out the forensic evidence. They didn't just need this witness testimony. Do you think they've done a good job of that? Do you think that there's more that needs to be done to convince the jury of the prosecution's forensic evidence?
When you talk about finding someone guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, you should dot your I's and cross your T's. And there were a lot of instances here where that did not happen. So I think they still have some work to do. Simply talking about, for example, the cell phone, where they said he used his wife's cell phone to set up this account, but they never tested the cell phone to show that he was using the cell phone, that he was touching the cell phone, or his DNA was on the cell phone. Those are basic things that should have been done to corroborate their story. Now, you also do have some other evidence that could be considered, like him switching to the triple pane windows that would be soundproof if he didn't want someone outside to hear the gunshots and try and call the police early before they can figure out the rest of their plan. There were some circumstantial things that they're pointing to. For example, him going to the McDonald's, which is apparently a part of the plan. They're pointing to that, but there are some loopholes there and some gaps that they didn't fill. They could have easily filled during the investigation.
Dante, then there happens to be the prosecution's witness list, which we know, quite honestly, it's extensive. And so with that being said, is that typical with a trial, with a case like this? Do you have a long list and perhaps call all or very few on that list?
It's typical. The prosecution has to prove their case. And in order to do that, they want to make sure they cover all their bases. So generally, what they'll do is they'll include any possible witness that they may call on the witness list. And if they don't happen to call that person, it's okay. What you can't do is not include somebody on the witness list, and then you're in the middle of the trial and you say, oh man, if only I would have had this witness come in or this witness available to me. So what they do is they just cover their bases, list everybody possible, and oftentimes they don't get to everybody, because a lot of those witnesses are cumulative. They're going to say the same thing. So they may put 2 or 3 people who would say the same thing, and then whoever's the best person or whoever's available is the one of those 2 or 3 that they'll call. But they don't necessarily have to call all 2 or 3 people who would testify generally about the same topic. So yes, it's common. They fill the list with any possibilities and usually just pick and choose from that list. But the defense can't then say, oh, I'm surprised if they have to call somebody else that's not on that list.
Is there anything you're expecting from the prosecution or the defense when it comes to the closing arguments here? I know you mentioned the defense is going to be trying to put holes in that witness's story. Do you think there's anything the prosecution could be saying as we come to the end of this trial to kind of sway that in their favor?
Yes, they're going to be pointing to the circumstantial evidence. For example, the fact that she moved into the marital bedroom seemingly about 2 weeks after the murder. So they're going to be pointing to things like that to show that it's a consistent story. They were in this relationship together, this extramarital affair that they wanted to take to the next level, and that somebody was stopping them from doing that, and they had to take her out. And they're going to try and make it as basic as possible. This is a story that we've heard over and over for years, where you have an extramarital affair and you want the other person out of the way. So the prosecution, I think, is going to be able to, they're going to try to dumb this down to simply that. He wanted her gone. He made these moves to get her gone. The defense is going to say, no, that's a lie. Something happened there that shouldn't have happened. And they forced this person who wasn't comfortable with the country, wanted to go back home. They said, if you say what we want you to say about Mr. Banfield being guilty, then we'll let you out of jail. And that's why she did that.
One of the main things that we talked about on Thursday, I think it was last week, was the knife that was used as the murder weapon in this scene. They said there was not concrete forensic evidence showing that one person or the other was holding it during the murder. How common is that in your experience? Because it seems like, this is really tough to have a case without a smoking gun, as it were.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a smoking gun, other than somebody being a part of it, now cooperating, but it happens often. I know we hear and we see just DNA evidence and forensic evidence on TV shows a lot that just ties everything together in a nice little bow, and they say, we got you, we got a DNA sample or a fingerprint on this. It generally doesn't work like that in real life, especially when you're talking about people that live in the same household. There's going to be some transfer DNA that's available. So that kind of evidence would be inconclusive, because did he touch the knife before? Did his DNA get on there just because his DNA is around the house? And then you have inconclusive results that don't show things. So I think that's common as well. Not very often do you have DNA bring everything together in a nice package, but that's why the prosecutors usually approach it from different angles and bring in circumstantial evidence, other testimony, and try and say, listen, look at the big picture. And when you look at the big picture, you should be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt.
Yeah. Dante, we'll end with this, and that is, we know on Thursday when we last spoke with Bob Barnard, who yet again is inside that courtroom as you and I speak, he stated that the prosecution felt strong thus far. And I'm curious, when you have such a hiatus, in this case, 4 or 5 days since the trial was put on hold, if you will, over the weekend, and then you resume, I'm looking at it like a football game, per se. You're doing well at halftime, you go to halftime, you come back, it might be a different mood, a different demeanor. Is that the case? Do you find when you're in a trial that you at some point lose that energy you had at one point and or somewhat of a slump?
There could be a momentum shift in a trial, but it really wouldn't have to do with the time apart. Juries are very, very perceptive, and when they get into a trial, they really pay attention and they want to get the result correct. So I think they're still locked in, and that gap or that break in time won't impact them. What could change the trajectory of a trial are the witnesses. Wow. If a witness comes up that says something completely out of character or out of line with what the picture the prosecution is trying to paint, then it can be a shift where they start to disbelieve everybody that came before them. I think something like that is more likely to happen than the impact of time or days off, impacting how the jury looks at a particular case.
Well said. Yet again, Dante Mills joining us right here for Deadly Desires, the Brendan Banfield trial. Dante, we truly appreciate your time.
Have a good morning, guys.
All right, so obviously, Brendan, this is something we're going to have to keep a close eye on. One of the questions that you posed to me prior to starting the show today is, you said, Guy, I'm really curious, at what moment did the authorities realize that it happened to be more than what it was perceived to be?
That's something I found very curious about this whole trial, because, the Occam's razor here, you walk into the scene and you see a man who shot somebody breaking into his home, and the wife is there dead on the bed. And that seems on the surface of it like an open and shut case. I'm really curious to see if we hear from the police or from the prosecutors, maybe during the closing arguments, how they realized there was something more going on. Because we've heard from the defense, even the defense acknowledging there was more happening here.
Yeah.
There was an affair. There was some kind of complicity that led to this scenario, whether or not he's guilty of the murder or not. And so I'm very, very curious to hear from the police. Maybe this will be after all of this is said and done, about how that investigation unfolded.
Yet again, testimony is key. And with that being said, let's go ahead and take a live look into the courtroom as testimony from a witness now underway.